The Senate has thrown its weight behind an ambitious plan by the Southeast Development Commission, SEDC, to transform the region into a $200 billion economy within 10 years, even as lawmakers warn the agency against mismanaging public funds and urge it to prioritize impactful agriculture. Managing Director of the Commission, Mark Okoye, unveiled the economic blueprint during the agency's 2026 budget defense before the Senate Committee on Southeast Development Commission in Abuja. The commission sought legislative backing for a proposed $140 billion appropriation to drive what he described as the commission's real takeoff year. Joining us on this show to discuss the regional transformation agenda that received broad political stakeholder endorsement at the recently concluded Southeast Vision 2050 Forum is Mark Okoye, founding Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer of the Southeast Development Commission, SEDC. Good morning, Mark Okoye, and thank you for joining us on the morning show.
Good morning, and thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Well, let's start with, the policy ideological background to these development commissions. Many Nigerians are very skeptical that, you're having regional development commissions in the Southeast, in the North, and everywhere. But we have seen these development commissions that failed. We had UMPADEC. We had the NDDC. What is the story? Just confusion, uncertainty, corruption. And now, well, let's leave that. You are in charge of the SEDC, Southeast Development Commission. So, the Vision 2050, what is the guarantee that this SEDC will provide sustainable growth and development for the people of the Southeast? I know you have partners, UNDP. The governors were at the event you organized. They said they will commit, was it $5 billion each that they promised? But Nigerians are saying, what will come out of it? We have had these stories before. Well, what will be different this time?
No. Thank you so much, Ruben. And like I said, it's a pleasure to be here. I think for us at the SEDC, the SEDC represents an aspiration for broadly maybe 50 million Igbos around the world and maybe a 22 million Igbos who are resident in the region. And we've been pleading for this agency for the last 54 years. In the last, under the last presidency, I believe we got past third reading, but it was not done for some reason. Mr. President came in after 6 presidents, 5 military administrators. He was the first to do it. It traces its history back to the 3 R's, post-Civil War construction. So for us in the region, everyone sees this organization and there's ownership. There's ownership, there's commitment, there's interest, right? So for us and the board, we take this as a very, very serious initiative. I know there's skepticism, but where we're coming from and what we've seen and what we've tried to do in the last 1 year has really been one where it is not our plan. We're seeking the thoughts, the ideas of the entire stakeholder system, our diaspora, our governors, our stakeholders, and all of these different buckets so that we can get their views and aspirations and have them key into what we have as our vision. In simple terms, we see it as our own federal platform that will champion a long-term development agenda, working closely with the states. We believe that the SEDC, with the state governments, can transform the region to become the preferred investment destination in Africa. We're looking at broadly 4 areas. One is that we want to drive the size of that economy from about $40 billion to $200 billion over the next 10 years, with strong collaboration between our diaspora, our private sector, our governors across industrialization, agriculture, creative economy, and technology. Secondly, if you just Google the search, you would see that the people in the Southeast are passionate about wanting their own port, wanting their own regional rail line, wanting their gas pipelines. But you and I know that if we put those things in the budget, we will be building it for the next 20, 30 years. What we want to do with the SEDC and have committed to doing it with the state governments in the region is to deliberately plan for those projects. Take them and get them bankable, make it investable, such that there's clear business case for investment, so that we can take it internationally and raise the funding for those initiatives. So we're thinking of running this organization very differently from how you see a typical government agency being run. Yeah.
Your money still comes from the government's coffers.
Yes.
You made reference to the first year when you were speaking just now, and it seems the first year was, according to your team, focused on institutional framework development. But some critics have come out to say, well, you received 5 billion naira for the first year, and with that 5 billion, you did stakeholder engagement, you did investment promotion, you did, people are saying, was that the correct way to start? Because they would have thought that, yes, 5 billion in the scope of big infrastructural projects may not be that much money, but I think there was an expectation that at least salaries would have been paid at the bare minimum. What did you guys do with the 5 billion that you received?
Fantastic question. We were set up on February 10th last year. The first day of office was February 11th, right? And in that first session, everything we're saying from our 10-year strategic roadmap for the organization approved. Budget approved by management, by the board, first 2 days. Anyone who has experience at federal government setting up an organization can be painstaking, right? But really, so what we did last year, everything around procurement processes, getting the required staff across different departments, putting them in, designing the structure, building the right relationship between the board and the management, reaching out to our critical stakeholders. Every single governor was met multiple times by the commission to share our in and get their buy-in. The entire private sector was met, all 170 of them, Manufacturers Association, SMEs, everybody, to get their buy-in into the agenda. Diaspora was met on multiple occasions. Through Twitter space, we met 5,000 people. Listened to them for 7 hours, right? We went abroad, we went to the Afro Exim to let them understand that we'll be at the IATF because we want to run a more sustainable model that helps us attract long-term funding. So to answer your question, and I answer it in 2 buckets, the Southeast faces an infrastructure deficit of $10 billion annually. You add the budgets of the states in that region, it's barely maybe a maximum of just about $2 billion. But that budget still has to pay for salaries, it has to pay for all these other different things. So the question is, how do we fill that gap? Can we fill that gap from federal government funding? We can't. But there's $22 billion of diaspora funding that's constantly coming into the country. There's another $50 to $100 billion of infrastructure financing that's around the African continent and abroad. Can you get that by sitting in Nigeria? Can you get that by sitting in Enugu? So these were the justifications for spending only a little bit of that money. The 5 billion, it only came on the end of December. Till today, I haven't earned a salary. My EDs have not earned a salary. The board members don't get allowances.
How much came out of the 5 billion? Do you spend out of the 5 billion for? Because from what you said, said interaction, Twitter Spaces. I know they don't pay for Twitter Spaces. In fact, on my Twitter page, if I do Spaces for you, say you engage 5,000 people, I will get 50,000 people on my Twitter Space. If I engage for. So, how much did you spend on all of this engagement, and where were you seeing the money to spend before the 5 billion came?
Oh, we had to tap into donors.
So you have to tap into donor fund. So how much of the donor fund did you spend?
How much of donor? No, you can't spend their money. They would run their own process.
So how much of that, the donor fund that came, that you spent before the 5 billion came?
I would say maybe I'd probably have to put the figures together because
you have to know the figures.
No, I can't. No, let me explain. Let me explain to you how donors work. If donors want to support you, right, they can do it in 2 folds. They either say, Rufai, we're going to support this great project on public awareness, and they will put the monies in your account. Or they say, Rufai, what do you want?
Okay, so calculate how much the donors put down before the 5 billion came. And how much did you have to take out of the 5 billion?
The likes of the UNDPs had supported us with anything from $300,000 to $400,000 across their own events.
So all the event, $300,000, $400,000.
Yes.
Yeah. So after they supported with $300,000, $400,000, is it that one cumulatively or UNDP alone?
No, cumulatively.
So everything. So you were running everything with over $300,000.
Yes, not that they're giving us.
No, I know.
Exactly.
Yeah, you were running.
They cover their own expenses.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but when December now came and 5 billion now came, how much did you take out of the 5 billion?
how much did we take out of the 5 billion?
Yeah.
So Rufai, as it stands, like what was captured in that budget document, right, was that we had a 140 billion naira budget. We were designing this organization from Abuja, flying into the country, into the capital every week. Not because we want to be in Abuja, but simply because we need to build out a federal government institution.
I get all of that garbage.
So there was
this remaining 5 billion.
No, it's not garbage. You say garbage. You shouldn't say garbage.
Yeah. No, I said no.
You said you get all that garbage.
I said I get all the gamutes.
Okay, gamutes.
You didn't hear me properly.
Okay.
I get all the arguments on the gamutes. But what I'm saying is, this 5 billion that came in that they've only paid you, we know it's not the money they're supposed to pay you. Your budget is way more than that, all right? How much have you now spent out of that 5 billion that came in? Minus the donor cost of 300,000.
Between then and I would say probably the last 2 weeks or last 3 weeks when we're preparing for the budget, I would say probably roughly about 700, 800 million, just around that.
Okay, so you still have about 4-point-something billion in the
Yes.
Okay.
But that's not the...
Okay. Now, what I get from what you are saying, I mean, you set up the bureaucracy, you've defined properly the institutional framework, you have stakeholders that you're already working with, you need more money, perhaps from the federal government of Nigeria and the state governments. What should be the expectations of the people of those southeastern region? What should be the benchmarks in terms of how, they assess you when you move away from bureaucracy and you begin to function? And what are your fears?
That's a good one. Essentially, and I'll just maybe just summarize our program of interventions and how we want to run the organization. The budget, I'm sure some may have seen, was barely, maybe they took 2-3 lines of a budget. I'm telling you that what people saw and called a budget, for Christ's sakes, having done 7 years as a budget and planning commissioner, 5 years as a top investment banker with AfriInvest, 4 years running the investment agency in Anambra State, without blemish, not one blemish, right? So
let other people judge.
yes. So when they pick out cleverly 1 or 2 things and show it's neither here nor there. Essentially, the budget that is approved by the board represents broadly 8 critical areas. Number 1 is we held a Vision 2050 forum where all our governors were there and they gave us feedback. You covered it live. Governor Soludo said, let's all work on a regional security integration program. We must come to that arrangement with some skin in the game. Otherwise, you look like you're just pulling figures from your head and say, all 5 governors, are we going to support you with this? No, you must say, Your Excellencies, you are the chief security officers, you're the political leadership. This is our own contribution. How can we work together to define this? That's one. So it's extremely important because our view is how do we de-risk the Southeast for investment to come in? The second initiative is industrialization. The easiest thing, Rufai, for me to do as an MD of a development commission is to ensure my local government and the local government and all the other political stakeholders is covered by roads, 1 and 2 kilometer roads. Those are responsibilities of states and local governments. Our industrialization program it aggregates our road infrastructure budget and says there are 5 special economic zone projects in our region. Let's take the roads and open them up. You've been to the Southeast. Every 50, 60 meters, there's an industry, there's a factory, all running on diesel. Without infrastructure, without shared infrastructure, our view is how do we take those roads and open and provide infrastructure to our special economic zone so that the investment can come in and create jobs. The third is how do we address food security? Mind you, as we were preparing for our programs and defining them, every single one is mapped to Mr. President's manifesto. So we are drawing it, page 52, page this, and we're drawing the linkages. The third bit is agriculture. How do we address food security? But most importantly, the greatest hindrance in the Southeast is that 70% of your spend in agriculture is done with land clearing. Our view is 200, 300, 1,000 hectares. We have a target of 50,000 hectares to clear land and bring in agricultural mechanized investments in a hub and spoke model. The fourth area, which is very, very critical to us, is that this region has, I would say 75% of its population is under 35. We have founders there, we have bright people, we have innovation, but they need the right support and financing to catalyze them. So that's where we introduced the Southeast Venture Capital Program to invest, have a regional approach to providing capital so that these young kids don't have to leave the Southeast and run to Lagos looking for Rufai, looking for Oga Ruben to say, how can you give me $10,000 to start my startup? It should happen back home, and it should be sustainable. It should be merit-based. Also, again, in that is for the young people is the sports infrastructure. And I'm speaking to programs that you will probably start seeing in the next 100 to 120 days. Sports is very critical. The region is very talented in that. We are investing in infrastructure to act as a catalyst while also putting the policy framework that supports that. A number of the other areas that we're looking to, just to summarize, is we want gas pipelines. We want power. We want regional rail. We've done a number of opinion polls around this, and these are the yearnings of the people. But the truth is that at 140 billion, even if I got 100%, right?
And you're not going to get 100%.
Right, exactly. So even if I got 100%, let me be honest, if I got 100%, right, what will happen is the concept design we have for a Southeast Regional Rail is $5 billion. $5 billion is anything between 7.5 trillion naira, just about that. Probably will take us 30 years to get that sum. Gas pipelines, $1.6 billion. Right? Ports, at least $800 million, if not, right? So by the time you put these figures together, you realize that to go about that route, to getting those things, you just have to ensure those projects are bankable. Bankability means doing business plans, feasibility studies, environmental impact assessment, return on investment, to ensure I can take it and put it in front of any infrastructure fund globally, and then they will bring the fund.
All this sounds very nice. It's not new, actually. Beyond the skepticism about these development commissions. When we had Michael Okpara, Dr. Michael Okpara, he had a grand vision of development in the Southeast. Are there any guarantees that any of these things will be sustained over time, and that the same Southeasterners that you started with saying they want this will not sabotage the things? It's in Enugu State now also, or one or two states, where the vision of Okpara is being revived. But all those things, were left to waste. So the problem is not about the theory; it's about sustaining. So I would draw a quick response just from my past history, having served 13 and a half years in Anambra, working with 3 governors. Right, in that entire time, I ran investments, I ran the economy, and my approach was we didn't have resources, but we got things bankable. Right, and I left that job. And I can still point to Linden Farms, the largest poultry facility, government and private sector partnership, Coast Chai's Farms, Anambra Oka New City Development, all of these things where government and private sector have partnered. We've studied the Okpara model, the ENDC, fantastic agenda. What were areas where if they were doing it today, how would they do it differently? They would have brought private sector on operations and private sector on ownership, where they own majority. This leads me to the other point where I was heading to, where I was saying, how are we thinking about those transformative projects? Mm-hmm. Mr. President last year approved the Southeast Investment Company Limited. Mm-hmm. The purpose of that is that we want to use that as a flagship to drive the bankability, do the studies of all these projects so that we can take them to market. Our budget has funding to capitalize that entity, but ultimately that entity, we will get capital from state governments, we'll get capital from private sector, capital from diaspora, so we can drive this initiative sustainably. Last point I want to make on that is, as a board, led by Emeka Nwogo and the leadership of the organization, we have put a target for ourselves. In 8 years, we don't want SEDC to depend on government revenue. We want that investment company to be the one running the SEDC, which gives us a more sustainable model.
I like that you're saying that because it actually goes into my next question, which is that especially when you look at like an NDDC, for example, you see that tension that often arises between Development Commission and state. Politics is a very big element where these development commissions are concerned. Change in governments and so forth. So, I mean, yes, it's great that you have certain governors who have bought into this vision right now, and your aspiration is to no longer depend on government funds. But, realistically speaking, we know the nuances that happen when there's tension between what the Development Commission is doing and maybe what the state is doing at various levels. Tell me a little bit about navigating between the relationship, learning from some of the mistakes that we've seen being made by, let's say, an NDDC. What are your biggest takeaways? Should I say, what's the biggest lesson that you hope to correct that you've seen maybe being made by other development commissions? We don't have to call them by name.
Yeah, so the other development commissions that came in the pre-President Tinubu era are 2 development commissions, right? And there are huge lessons to learn: good, medium, bad, right? And for us, the key takeaways, right? And that's really the key takeaways is that, one, sustainability is important. You just must find a funding model that makes sense, right? And which is why from the get-go, we're going this approach, and it's been presented to Mr. President, and he gave the approval for us to go and identify the more sustainable approach to running it. That's number 1. Number 2 is the vision, having clarity of vision. Rufai, you're talking about funding. Many government agencies, typically, they are set up today, maybe in a month or a month and a half, they get funding. We at SEDC were actually pretty glad that it did not come early. Why? It gave us time to understand ourselves, to agree and key into one plan and have one vision. That process, people say stakeholders engagement and whatever. There are 2 types. There's the stakeholder engagement where you open up to your politicians, open up to your political leadership, open up to your private sector, and present it and get their feedback. Once these things are done, they hold you accountable, but they also have this collective ownership of that agenda. The second aspect is also bringing in international audience and letting them understand, let's come in, let's become stakeholders. At our last event in Enugu, 75 people came in from the diaspora on their own cost to attend, to endorse, to participate in building a 25-year plan. The greatest tool in public policy is stakeholder engagement. It allows you by collective ownership. It's what allows you to ensure that as governments change, there's ownership. Because imagine you're president tomorrow, right? And you come in and you've seen an agency that has taken the feedback of the entire region. Would you, in your own position, want to go against that? Okay. Right?
We have 1 minute as we wrap up. So this question is going to be an advice.
Yes.
And I'm also going to open your eyes to an opportunity. Have you done the dead capital valuation of the entire Southeast as we speak? Have you done it? Do you have the numbers?
We are currently working on it.
You're working on it?
Yes.
That might unlock some of the funding you need. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. And thanks immensely.
And that might also bring you in conflict, into conflict with some other stakeholders. But in any case, thank you very much for joining us on the Morning Show.